Heavenly Father, I pray for everyone watching this video right now. May you bless them with peace, joy, and breakthroughs in their lives. Amen. Hello, my wonderful family. I am so glad and grateful to have you here with me today. Your support means the world, and I truly don't take it for granted. Before we dive into today's powerful story, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, drop a comment below to share your thoughts, and of course, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update from this channel. Mr. Blackwood, there's nothing more we can do. The words hit Daniel Blackwood like a physical blow, even though he'd heard variations of them from 17 different specialists across 3 continents. He gripped the leather arms of the hospital chair, his knuckles white against the pristine material, watching Dr. Martinez's mouth continue moving though the sound felt underwater now. 6 months. 6 months since the accident, since his world had shattered into before and after. Before, when 8-year-old Emma hummed while she painted watercolor butterflies. Before, when her twin brother Jake practiced piano scales that echoed through their estate's halls. After, when both children lay motionless in beds that cost more than most people's houses, their bright eyes staring at nothing, their bodies refusing every command from minds trapped inside. The spinal injuries are too severe, Dr. Martinez continued, his voice gentle but final. Combined with the traumatic brain injuries, we're looking at a permanent vegetative state. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but after 6 months with no improvement. Daniel's throat closed. He'd built a tech empire worth $12 billion by refusing to accept impossible. He'd revolutionized global communications by believing in solutions others couldn't see. But money meant nothing when it couldn't buy back his children's laughter. Welcome to a story about the moment when hope seems lost forever, and the unexpected place where miracles hide in plain sight. The meeting ended with more words Daniel didn't hear. He walked through the hospital corridors like a ghost, past families clinging to their own desperate hopes, past nurses who'd learned to recognize the hollow look of parents facing the unthinkable. His driver waited outside in the Bentley, but Daniel needed air. He needed to think. He needed to figure out how to go home and look at Rosa Santos, the maid who'd been caring for his children, and tell her that the doctors had finally given up. Rosa, the quiet woman from El Salvador who'd worked for his family for 3 years, who'd stayed late every night since the accident without being asked, who spoke to Emma and Jake like they could hear every word. Daniel had never paid much attention to household staff before. That had been his late wife Catherine's domain. But after Catherine's death from cancer 2 years ago, Rosa had become the steady presence that kept their shattered family functioning. The guilt twisted in his chest as he drove through the gates of his Malibu estate. He'd been so consumed with finding medical solutions, flying to Switzerland and Germany and Japan, consulting with neurosurgeons and experimental therapists, that he'd barely been home. Rosa had become his children's constant companion by default, not design. The house felt tomb-like as he entered. 30,000 square feet of smart home technology and imported marble, all of it meaningless now. He'd designed it to be Catherine's dream home, but she'd only lived in it for 6 months before the cancer took her. Now it felt like a mausoleum for everything he'd lost. He climbed the stairs toward the children's wing, each step heavier than the last. The specialized hospital beds had been installed in what used to be the playroom, surrounded by equipment that monitored every heartbeat, every breath. Daniel paused outside the door, summoning the strength to face them. That's when he heard it. Singing. Not just any singing, Rosa's voice soft and melodic, carrying a lullaby in Spanish. But underneath it, something else. A rhythm. Movement. Daniel pressed himself against the wall beside the doorway, his heart hammering. Through the crack in the door, he could see Rosa sitting on the floor between the 2 beds. But she wasn't just sitting there. She was moving Emma's legs in gentle, cycling motions while she sang, her hands supporting Emma's feet as she guided them through the motion of walking. Asterisk uno, dos, tres, cuatro. Asterisk, Rosa counted softly, moving Emma's right foot forward, then her left. Remember, Mija, this is how we walked to the garden to see the butterflies. Daniel's breath caught. Emma's eyes were following Rosa's movements. Not staring at the ceiling like they had for months, but tracking the motion of her own feet. Rosa moved to Jake's bed, beginning the same gentle routine. Asterisk and you, mi amor. Remember when you danced to your piano music? Your feet knew every note. Asterisk, she guided his legs through the same walking motions, humming a melody Daniel recognized. Chopin's Minute Waltz, Jake's favorite piece. And Jake. Jake's fingers twitched. Not the random muscle spasms the doctors had mentioned, but deliberate movement, as if he was trying to play along with Rosa's humming. Daniel gripped the doorframe, his vision blurring. Rosa had been doing this. Every day while he was chasing miracle cures around the world, she'd been here, believing in her own kind of impossible. "I know you're listening, Ms. Niños," Rosa whispered, still moving their legs in perfect rhythm. "I know you want to come back to us. So we practice, yes? Every day we practice until you're ready." That's when Emma's toe flexed. Deliberately. Unmistakably. Rosa gasped, her hands freezing on Emma's foot. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Emma's toe flexed again, stronger this time, as if she was trying to push against Rosa's palm. Asterisk Dios mío asterisk, Rosa breathed, tears streaming down her face. Asterisk Emma mi vida, can you hear me? Asterisk. Emma's eyes shifted slowly, deliberately, until they locked onto Rosa's face. And for the first time in 6 months, she blinked once. Intentionally. Daniel's knees nearly gave out. He stumbled backward from the doorway, his mind reeling. Every doctor had said it was impossible. Every specialist had confirmed there was no hope for conscious response. But he'd just witnessed something that shattered every medical opinion he'd received. His children weren't gone. They were fighting their way back. And the woman he'd barely noticed, the quiet maid he'd taken for granted, was the one helping them find their way home. Daniel stumbled down the hallway, his legs unsteady as adrenaline coursed through his veins. He needed to process what he'd just witnessed, needed to understand how long Rosa had been working this miracle while he'd been racing around the world throwing money at impossible solutions. He found himself in his study, the room where he'd built his empire, surrounded by monitors displaying real-time data from his tech companies. The numbers meant nothing now. His fortune felt like play money compared to the wealth he'd just discovered in his children's room. Hope. His hands shook as he pulled up Rosa's employment file on his computer. Rosa Elena Santos, 34 years old, originally from San Salvador, came to the United States 7 years ago. Previous employment with 3 families in Beverly Hills before Catherine hired her 3 years ago. But the file told him nothing about who she really was. He realized with crushing shame that in 3 years, he'd never asked Rosa about her life, her family, her dreams. She'd been invisible to him, just another service provider in the machinery that kept his life running smoothly. Catherine had known, though. Catherine had always made time for the people who worked for them, learning their names, asking about their families. She'd specifically requested Rosa for the children's care after the housekeeper had mentioned Rosa's way with kids. "She has a gift, Daniel," Catherine had said during one of her final weeks. Asterisk, the children light up when Rosa's around. "Promise me you'll make sure she stays with them." Asterisk. He'd promised, but he'd never understood what Catherine meant. Now the memory hit him like a physical blow. Catherine had seen something in Rosa that he'd been too self-absorbed to notice. A soft knock interrupted his spiraling thoughts. "Mr. Blackwood?" Rosa stood in the doorway, her uniform slightly wrinkled, her dark hair pulled back in its usual practical bun. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and Daniel realized she'd been crying since the moment with Emma. "Rosa, please come in." He gestured to the chair across from his desk, the same chair where he conducted multi-million-dollar negotiations. We need to talk." She approached cautiously, her hands clasped in front of her. "If this is about what you saw, I can explain. I know I should have asked permission, but the doctors, they said nothing could help, and I thought maybe." "Rosa, stop." Daniel held up his hand. "You don't need to explain anything. What I saw up there." Emma moved. She looked at you. Really looked. Fresh tears spilled down Rosa's cheeks. "You believe me? The nurses, when I try to tell them, they say it's wishful thinking. They say I'm seeing things that aren't there. I saw it too." Daniel's voice cracked. "I saw my daughter respond to you in a way she hasn't responded to anyone in 6 months. I need to understand how. I need to understand what you've been doing." Rosa took a shaky breath. "In my country, my grandmother was a curandera, a healer. Not with medicine, but with touch, with belief, with love. She always said the body remembers what the mind forgets. When I see Emma and Jake like this, I think maybe their bodies remember how to move. They just need someone to remind them." "How long have you been doing this?" "Every day since they came home from the hospital. The doctors, they talk about stimulation therapy, but they do it for 15 minutes with machines. I do it for hours, with my hands, with songs, with stories. I tell them about their mother, about the games they used to play. I talk to them like they're still here, because I believe they are." Daniel felt something crack open in his chest. This woman, who earned in a year what he made in an hour, had been pouring her heart into his children while he'd been writing checks to specialists who'd given up. Rosa, I owe you an apology. A massive apology. I've been so focused on finding a medical miracle that I didn't see the miracle happening right in my own home. She looked down at her hands. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Blackwood. I love those children. Mrs. Catherine, before she went to heaven, she asked me to take care of them. I made her a promise. The words hit Daniel like a freight train. Catherine had asked Rosa to care for the children. Not just to clean their rooms or prepare their meals, but to truly care for them. And Rosa had been honoring that promise every single day while he'd been absent, chasing solutions everywhere except where they actually existed. Tell me about your family, Rosa. Do you have children? For the first time, Rosa's composure cracked completely. She pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back a sob. I had a daughter, Sophia. She would be 12 now. Would be. She died in San Salvador. There was an earthquake when she was 4. The building collapsed. Rosa's voice became barely a whisper. I couldn't save her. I tried to dig through the rubble with my bare hands, but Daniel's world tilted. This woman had lost her own child, had carried that grief across borders and years, and had been channeling that loss into saving his children. The magnitude of her sacrifice, her daily choice to love his family despite her own devastating loss, rendered him speechless. That's why you came to America? Everything reminded me of her. My mother, she said maybe God needed me somewhere else to help other children. When I saw Emma and Jake after the accident, lying so still, I thought maybe this is why I'm here. Maybe I couldn't save Sophia, but I can help bring these babies back. Daniel had to look away, overwhelmed by the depth of her pain and purpose. Here was a woman who'd lost everything, who could have become bitter and closed off, instead choosing to pour her maternal love into children who weren't her own. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinez's office, confirming their next appointment to discuss end-of-life care options. Daniel stared at the message, then deleted it. Rosa, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Do you really believe they can come back? Not just small improvements, but really come back. Rosa met his eyes with a fierce intensity he'd never seen before. Mr. Blackwood, I have felt Emma squeeze my hand. I have seen Jake try to hum along when I sing. The doctors, they see broken bodies. I see sleeping souls. And souls can wake up. Then we're going to do this together. No more specialists, no more experimental treatments. We're going to follow your lead. For the first time since he'd known her, Rosa smiled. A real smile that transformed her entire face. There's something else, she said hesitantly. I've been keeping a journal, writing down everything I see, every small response. I thought maybe if I could show patterns, show progress. You've been documenting everything? 3 months worth. Every eye movement, every muscle response, every time they seem to react to music or stories. I was afraid to show anyone because the nurses already think I'm. She paused, searching for the word. Delusional. Asterisk loca asterisk, she said with a small laugh. Crazy. Can I see it? Rosa hesitated. It's in Spanish. And my English writing, it's not very good. Rosa, you could write it in hieroglyphics and I'd learn to read it. Please. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small notebook, worn at the edges from constant handling. As she placed it in his hands, their fingers brushed, and Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine human connection. He opened the journal and immediately saw dates, times, detailed observations written in careful script. Even though he couldn't read Spanish, he could see the meticulous care in every entry, the hope documented in precise detail. I'll have this translated, but first, I want you to tell me about today. What exactly happened before I arrived? Rosa's eyes lit up. It was different today. Usually, when I move Emma's legs, her eyes just stare up. But today, she started watching my hands. And when I sang the lullaby her mother used to sing, her breathing changed. It became, how do you say synchronizado? Synchronized? Yes. Like she was trying to breathe with the music. And Jake, when I hummed his piano song, his fingers moved exactly on the beats where he used to play the notes. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't random muscle movement. This was conscious response, memory, intention. Rosa, I want to set up cameras in their room. Not to spy on you, but to document what you're seeing. If we can capture these responses, we can prove to the medical community that consciousness is still there. She nodded eagerly. Yes, but Mr. Blackwood, there's something else. Something I haven't told anyone. What? Sometimes, when it's very quiet and I'm sitting with them, I hear. Before she could finish, Daniel's business phone rang. The caller ID showed his assistant, Margaret. I'm sorry, I have to take this. It's about the Hensley merger. As he answered the call, Rosa quietly slipped away, taking her journal with her. Daniel found himself pulled into a complex conversation about stock options and regulatory approval, the corporate world demanding his attention just as he was finally connecting with what truly mattered. By the time he finished the call 20 minutes later, Rosa was gone. He found a note on his desk. Asterisk, Mr. Blackwood, I go to prepare the children's dinner. We talk more tomorrow? Rosa asterisk. But when Daniel went to check on the children later that evening, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. Dr. Martinez was in the room with two other specialists, examining Emma and Jake with equipment Daniel didn't recognize. Rosa stood in the corner, her face pale with fear. Ah, Daniel, Dr. Martinez said without looking up. Good timing. We've received some concerning reports from your nursing staff about unusual behavior patterns in the children. We're here to conduct a full neurological assessment. What kind of reports? Claims of voluntary movement, responsive behavior. Of course, we know these are likely misinterpretations by non-medical personnel, but we need to rule out seizure activity or muscular complications. Daniel's eyes found Rosa, who was shaking her head almost imperceptibly. One of the nurses, a stern woman named Patricia whom Daniel barely knew, stepped forward. I've documented several instances of the domestic staff making unrealistic claims about patient responsiveness. I felt obligated to report it to Dr. Martinez. False hope can be damaging to family members' psychological health. The betrayal hit Daniel like a physical blow. Someone in his own house had been monitoring Rosa, had been reporting her efforts as delusion, had potentially sabotaged the first real progress his children had made. I see, Daniel said carefully, his mind racing. And what does this assessment involve? Standard neural response testing. If there's any real consciousness present, we'll detect it. But Daniel could see Rosa's terrified expression, could see her hands trembling as the doctors hooked additional monitoring equipment to his children. Whatever delicate progress had been made, whatever trust Emma and Jake had begun to show, was about to be destroyed by clinical intrusion. He realized with devastating clarity that he had to choose. Trust the medical establishment that had already given up on his children, or trust the woman who'd been fighting for them every single day. The woman whose own daughter was gone forever, but who refused to let his children follow the same path. Dr. Martinez, I need to speak with you privately, Daniel said, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting in his chest. The doctor looked up from the array of monitoring equipment now surrounding Emma's bed. Of course. Patricia, continue with the baseline neurological assessments. Dr. Chen, I want a full EEG workup on both children. As they stepped into the hallway, Daniel caught Rosa's eye. She was pressed against the wall, watching the medical team with the expression of a mother bird whose nest was being invaded. The sight of her fear crystallized something dangerous inside him. Dr. Martinez, before you continue, I need to tell you something. I witnessed responsive behavior from both children earlier today. Intentional movement, eye-tracking, deliberate actions. Dr. Martinez's expression didn't change. Daniel, I understand how desperately you want to see progress, but I'm not talking about wishful thinking. I'm talking about Emma flexing her toe on command and tracking visual movement with her eyes. I'm talking about Jake's fingers moving in rhythm with specific musical patterns. Even if that were the case, these could be involuntary responses, muscle memory, or seizure activity. That's exactly why we need these tests. Daniel felt the first stirring of something he hadn't experienced in months, protective fury. And what happens if your tests disrupt whatever progress they're making? Daniel, there is no progress. I've explained this repeatedly. What you're describing is medically impossible given the extent of their injuries. Then explain what I saw. Dr. Martinez sighed with practiced patience. The mind plays tricks when we're grieving. Your domestic worker has likely been sharing her delusions with you, and... Don't. Daniel's voice cut like a blade. Don't dismiss Rosa Santos. She's been with my children every day while your medical team wrote them off. If anyone understands their condition, it's her. Daniel, I realize you're emotionally attached to your staff, but we can't allow untrained personnel to interfere with medical care. In fact, that's part of why we're here. Something cold slithered down Daniel's spine. What do you mean? The nursing reports indicate your domestic worker has been performing unauthorized physical therapy, possibly causing muscular strain or neurological stress. We need to establish proper medical protocols. Proper medical protocols like what? Supervised care only. No unauthorized stimulation. And honestly, Daniel, I think it's time we discuss transitioning the children to a specialized long-term care facility where they can receive appropriate. No. The word erupted from Daniel with volcanic force. Absolutely not. Dr. Martinez blinked, clearly taken aback by the vehemence of Daniel's response. Daniel, I understand this is difficult, but caring for 2 children in permanent vegetative states requires round-the-clock medical supervision. The liability alone. They're not in permanent vegetative states. I saw my daughter respond to Rosa today. I saw my son attempt to communicate. What you saw was likely. I saw what I saw. Daniel stepped closer, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. And I'm telling you right now, my children are not leaving this house, and Rosa Santos is not being removed from their care. Dr. Martinez's expression hardened. Daniel, I'm going to be very direct with you. Your emotional state is compromised. You're exhibiting signs of complicated grief, possibly complicated by the domestic worker's influence. I'm recommending psychological evaluation alongside the children's medical assessment. The words hit Daniel like a slap. Dr. Martinez wasn't just dismissing his children. He was questioning Daniel's sanity, his fitness as a father, his ability to make decisions about his own family. Are you threatening me, Dr. Martinez? I'm protecting your children's welfare. And yours. From inside the room came the sound of machines beeping more rapidly, followed by Rosa's voice, urgent and distressed. Asterisk, poor favor, no. You're scaring them, asterisk. Both men rushed back into the room to find Emma's heart rate monitor, showing elevated stress patterns, while Dr. Chen attempted to attach additional electrodes to her temples. Rosa stood between the doctor and Jake's bed, her arms spread protectively. The stimulation is causing agitation, Dr. Chen reported. Heart rate is climbing. We may need to administer sedatives. No sedatives, Daniel commanded. Dr. Martinez turned to him with barely concealed exasperation. Daniel, if the children are experiencing distress, they're experiencing distress because strangers are hooking machines to their heads. Daniel moved to Emma's bedside, gently taking her hand. Rosa, talk to her. Like you always do. Rosa approached cautiously, the doctors watching her with clinical skepticism. She began humming the Spanish lullaby Daniel had heard earlier, her voice soft and soothing. Within seconds, Emma's heart rate began to normalize. Dr. Chen stared at his monitors in confusion. That's unusual. The stress indicators are decreasing significantly. It's not unusual, Rosa said quietly. It's love. Dr. Martinez checked his own readings, his frown deepening. Coincidence, or the natural progression of a stress response cycle. But Daniel was watching Emma's face, and he saw what the doctors missed. As Rosa's voice filled the room, Emma's eyes shifted toward the sound. Deliberately, consciously. Dr. Martinez, look at her eyes. I'm looking. I see standard involuntary movements. No, you're not looking. You're looking at your machines. Look at my daughter. The tension in the room escalated as the 2 men faced off across Emma's bed, Rosa's lullaby the only sound bridging the chasm between medical authority and parental intuition. That's when Jake's fingers moved. Not a twitch or spasm, but a deliberate pressing motion against his blanket, perfectly timed with the melody Rosa was humming. 1 finger, then 2, then 3, following the rhythm of Chopin's Minute Waltz. Everyone in the room saw it. No one could dismiss it. Dr. Chen's voice was barely a whisper. That's impossible. Dr. Martinez moved to Jake's bedside, his professional composure cracking. That's not random movement. That's conscious response, Daniel finished. What Rosa has been telling you for months. Rosa stopped humming, and Jake's fingers immediately stilled. She began again, and the movement resumed, precise and intentional. My God, Dr. Chen breathed. They're responding to specific auditory stimuli with learned motor patterns. Dr. Martinez was frantically checking Jake's chart against his observations. The brain scans showed massive trauma to the motor cortex. This level of retained function should be impossible. Should be, Daniel said quietly. But isn't. For a moment, hope flickered in Dr. Martinez's eyes. The hope of a man who'd entered medicine to heal, who'd been forced to deliver too many death sentences. But then professional caution reasserted itself. Even if this indicates some level of consciousness, Daniel, the prognosis remains extremely guarded. Minimal response doesn't equal recovery potential. We need extensive testing. No more testing. Daniel's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to making billion-dollar decisions. No sedatives, no facility transfers, no removal of Rosa from their care. Daniel, you're not medically qualified to make these decisions. I'm their father. That's the only qualification that matters. Patricia, the nurse who'd been silent until now, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. Mr. Blackwood, I feel obligated to inform you that if you refuse medical recommendations for the children's care, I'll need to file a report with Child Protective Services. The words detonated like a bomb in the room. Rosa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. You're threatening to have my children taken away because I want to follow the treatment plan that's actually showing results? I'm protecting children who can't advocate for themselves from what could be considered medical neglect. Daniel looked around the room, at the doctors who'd given up on his children, at the nurse who saw Rosa's love as a threat, at the machines that measured heartbeats but couldn't detect hope. Then he looked at Rosa, whose dark eyes reflected the same terror he felt. She'd lost one child to circumstances beyond her control. Now she faced losing Emma and Jake to bureaucratic cruelty. The choice crystallized with perfect clarity. Everyone out, Daniel said quietly. Daniel, Dr. Martinez began. Everyone. Out. Now. Mr. Blackwood, you can't just, Patricia started. I can and I am. This is my house, these are my children, and you have 30 seconds to remove yourselves and your equipment before I have security escort you out. Dr. Martinez's face flushed with anger. Daniel, you're making a catastrophic mistake. Without proper medical supervision. 20 seconds. Dr. Chen was already disconnecting his monitoring equipment, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. Patricia stood her ground, her face set in rigid disapproval. I'll be filing my report within the hour, she said coldly. 10 seconds. As the medical team gathered their equipment and filed out, Daniel felt the weight of the irrevocable choice he'd just made. He'd chosen Rosa's faith over medical authority. He'd chosen love over fear. He'd chosen to fight for his children instead of mourning them. But in doing so, he'd also declared war on a system that held the power to tear his family apart. The door closed behind the last doctor, leaving Daniel alone with Rosa and the children. The sudden silence felt both liberating and terrifying. Mr. Blackwood, Rosa whispered, tears streaming down her face. What have we done? Daniel moved to stand beside her, looking down at Emma and Jake, who seemed more peaceful than they'd been in months without the invasive medical equipment. We've chosen to believe in impossible things, he said quietly. And now we have to prove we're right. But even as he spoke the words, Daniel knew the true catastrophe was just beginning. Patricia would file her report. Child Protective Services would investigate. And he would have to find a way to prove that Rosa's love was healing his children before the system decided he was an unfit father. He had perhaps days before everything he'd fought to protect would be ripped away. Rosa seemed to sense his thoughts. She moved closer to him, close enough that he could smell her lavender soap, could feel the warmth of her presence. Mr. Blackwood. Daniel, I want you to know something. Whatever happens, whatever they try to do, I will never abandon Emma and Jake. Even if they force me to leave, I will find a way back to them. Looking into her eyes, Daniel realized he was seeing Rosa Santos clearly for the first time. Not as an employee, not as hired help, but as a woman of extraordinary courage who'd chosen to love his children as fiercely as she'd loved her own lost daughter. A woman who was willing to risk everything to save the family she'd chosen to protect. And in that moment, something shifted between them. Something that had nothing to do with employer and employee, and everything to do with two people united in desperate love for the same children. Rosa, he said quietly, I need you to know that whatever happens next, you're not just the children's caregiver anymore. You're family. And I protect my family. The weight of that declaration hung between them as they stood together in the fading evening light, knowing that by morning, their world would be under siege. The call came at 6:47 a.m. Daniel jerked awake in his study where he'd fallen asleep at his desk, surrounded by legal documents and research on parental rights. His phone's harsh ring cut through the early morning silence like a scream. Mr. Blackwood? This is Janet Morrison from Child Protective Services. I need to schedule an emergency welfare check for your children. Today. Daniel's blood turned to ice. Today. We received a concerning report from medical professionals regarding potential neglect of disabled minors. I can be there at 9 a.m., or we can involve law enforcement to ensure compliance. The threat was clear. Daniel glanced at the clock. Less than 2 hours to prepare for a fight that could end with his children being removed from their home. 9 a.m. is fine, he managed. Excellent. Please ensure all medical records are available, along with documentation of current care protocols. And Mr. Blackwood? Any attempts to interfere with our assessment will be viewed as obstruction. The line went dead. Daniel stared at his phone, then at the legal research scattered across his desk. 12 hours of work by his team of attorneys, and their conclusion was devastating. If CPS determined the children were receiving inadequate medical care, they could remove Emma and Jake within hours. He found Rosa in the children's room, sitting on the floor between their beds as always, but today she wasn't moving their legs or singing. She was simply holding Emma's hand, tears streaming silently down her face. "You heard," Daniel said quietly. She nodded without looking up. Margaret called. She said CPS is coming. Margaret, his assistant, who'd been monitoring the legal situation through the night. Daniel felt a stab of gratitude for her vigilance, followed immediately by guilt that Rosa had learned about the threat from someone else. "Rosa, I want you to know, whatever happens, I'm not letting them take the children. Or you. Mr. Blackwood, Daniel. Maybe it's better if I'm not here when they come. If my presence is causing problems." "No." The word came out sharper than he intended. "You're not the problem. You're the solution they refuse to see." Rosa finally looked up at him, and Daniel felt something electric pass between them. In the soft morning light, with her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in its usual practical bun, she looked younger, more vulnerable. Beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with her role as his employee. "I've been thinking all night," she said softly. "About Sophia. About how I couldn't save her. If Emma and Jake are taken away because of me." "Rosa, stop." Daniel sat on the floor beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "You didn't lose Sophia because you failed her. You lost her because sometimes terrible things happen that are beyond our control. But this we can control." She turned to face him, her dark eyes searching his face. "How?" "They have doctors, lawyers, the system. What do we have? We have the truth. We have love. And we have something else." "What?" Daniel pulled out his tablet, showing her the overnight surveillance footage he'd compiled. Proof. The screen showed Rosa with the children from multiple angles over the past week. But more importantly, it showed Emma's and Jake's responses, subtle but undeniable movements, eye tracking, the finger patterns that matched musical rhythms. "You recorded everything?" "Not just recorded. I had my tech team enhance the footage, isolate the movements, create frame-by-frame analysis. This isn't wishful thinking anymore, Rosa. This is documented evidence of consciousness." Hope flickered in her eyes, but it was tempered by fear. "Will they believe it? They'll have to. But Rosa, there's something else. Something I discovered when I was researching your background last night." Her expression immediately shuddered. "My background?" Daniel hesitated, realizing he was about to reveal that he'd been investigating her personal history. But the information was too important to withhold. "Your medical training in El Salvador. You weren't just anyone before you came here. You were a pediatric physical therapist." Rosa's face went white. "How did you?" "My security team does background checks on all household staff. But somehow your medical credentials weren't in your employment file. Why didn't you tell me you were qualified to do exactly what you've been doing with Emma and Jake?" Rosa stood abruptly, moving to the window. "Because in America, my credentials mean nothing. I tried to get licensed when I first arrived, but the bureaucracy, the language barriers, the cost. And after Sophia died, I couldn't bear the thought of working with children professionally again. It hurt too much." Daniel felt the pieces clicking into place. "So you took domestic work instead. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I figured out my life. But then Mrs. Catherine hired me, and Emma and Jake." She paused, her voice breaking. "They reminded me why I became a therapist in the first place. To help children who couldn't help themselves. Rosa, this changes everything. You're not just someone with good instincts. You're a trained professional who's been providing legitimate therapy." "But my license? I can fix that. I can hire the best immigration lawyers, fast-track your credentials, make this completely legal and official." Rosa turned from the window, her expression conflicted. "Daniel, why are you doing this? Really? It's not just about the children anymore, is it?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Daniel found himself studying her face, The way the morning light caught the gold flecks in her brown eyes, the graceful curve of her neck, the strength in her posture despite everything she'd endured. "No," he admitted quietly. "It's not just about the children." Before Rosa could respond, the doorbell rang. They both froze, checking the clock. 8:15 a.m. "They're early," Rosa whispered. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Asterisk, Janet Morrison and Dr. Martinez arrived together. "Should I stall?" Asterisk. Together. Daniel showed Rosa the message. Why would CPS bring Dr. Martinez? A cold realization crept over both of them. This wasn't just a welfare check. This was a coordinated intervention designed to remove the children and discredit Rosa's care. "They planned this," Rosa said, her voice tight with panic. The timing, bringing the doctor who already declared them hopeless. Daniel was already moving toward the door. "Stay with Emma and Jake. Whatever happens, don't leave them alone." "Daniel, wait." Rosa caught his arm, her touch sending an unexpected jolt through him. "Before you go down there, I need to tell you something. Something I've been afraid to say." "What?" "Yesterday, when Emma moved her toe for you. That wasn't the first time. It was just the first time someone else saw it. She's been responding to me for weeks. And Jake. Jake has been trying to speak." Daniel's world tilted. "What do you mean trying to speak?" "Lip movements, tongue positioning, like he's forming words but no sound comes out. I've been working with him on basic vocalizations, but I was terrified that if I told anyone before he was ready." "Rosa, are you saying they're further along than anyone realizes?" "I'm saying they're trapped in bodies that won't obey them, but their minds are completely present. They hear everything, understand everything. They're fighting so hard to come back." The doorbell rang again, longer this time, more insistent. Daniel looked into Rosa's eyes and made a decision that would change everything. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't know she was crying. "Then we fight harder," he said. "Whatever it takes." For a moment, the space between them crackled with unspoken possibility. Rosa's breath caught, her lips parting slightly, and Daniel found himself leaning closer. "Mr. Blackwood." Margaret's voice carried up the stairs, sharp with urgency. "They're demanding immediate access." The spell broke. Daniel stepped back, professional mask sliding into place, but his eyes never left Rosa's face. "Show them everything," he said. "If Emma and Jake are as aware as you say, then they need to see their children fighting for their family." As Daniel headed downstairs to face the bureaucratic firing squad, Rosa turned back to the children. But for the first time in months, she wasn't alone in her vigil. She was part of something larger, a family worth fighting for, and maybe, just maybe, a love worth believing in. What she didn't know was that Patricia, the hostile nurse, was already in the house, having arrived through the service entrance with a court order that superseded Daniel's authority. And what Daniel didn't know was that Dr. Martinez had brought more than just CPS backing. He'd brought a psychiatric evaluator to assess Daniel's mental competency as a father. As Daniel walked into what he thought was a routine inspection, he was actually walking into an ambush designed to destroy his family and separate him from Rosa forever. The real battle was about to begin, and none of them were prepared for how vicious it would become. Daniel descended the marble staircase with the confidence of a man who'd built an empire through strategic thinking and calculated risks. He was prepared for bureaucratic hostility, medical condescension, even legal threats. He was not prepared for what waited in his living room. Janet Morrison from CPS sat rigidly on his Italian leather sofa, her clipboard thick with documentation. Dr. Martinez stood by the fireplace with barely concealed smugness. But it was the third figure that made Daniel's blood freeze. Dr. Sarah Chun, not the neurologist from yesterday, but a different Dr. Chun entirely. A forensic psychiatrist whose presence could only mean one thing. They weren't just here to evaluate his children. They were here to evaluate him. "Mr. Blackwood," Janet Morrison began without preamble, "please have a seat. We need to discuss serious concerns about your children's welfare and your decision-making capacity." "My decision-making capacity?" Dr. Sarah Chun stepped forward with a thin smile. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm Dr. Chun, court-appointed psychiatric evaluator. Based on reports from medical professionals and household staff, there are questions about your ability to make rational decisions regarding your children's care." "Household staff." Daniel's mind raced. Who exactly has been? "Daniel," a familiar voice interrupted from the doorway. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Margaret stood in the entrance to the living room, her usually perfect composure cracked, her hands shaking. Behind her stood Patricia, the hostile nurse, but she wasn't alone. She was with someone Daniel recognized but couldn't immediately place. A man in an expensive suit who looked disturbingly familiar. Margaret, what's going on? His assistant of 8 years, the woman who'd helped him build his company, who knew every detail of his life, looked at him with genuine anguish. Daniel, I need you to know that I never wanted it to go this far. When they first approached me, they said it was just about getting proper medical care for the children. They? Who's they? The man in the expensive suit stepped forward, and Daniel's world tilted on its axis. Richard Hensley, CEO of Hensley Technologies, the company Daniel was supposed to acquire next month in a deal worth $3.8 billion. Hello, Daniel, Richard said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I think it's time we had an honest conversation. What the hell are you doing in my house, Richard? Protecting a very significant investment. You see, when someone controls $12 billion in assets but starts making erratic decisions, refusing medical advice, putting children at risk, becoming emotionally involved with domestic staff, well, that affects market confidence. The pieces crashed together in Daniel's mind with devastating clarity. The merger. You're trying to force the merger through by having me declared incompetent. I'm trying to prevent you from destroying everything you've built because you're having a nervous breakdown, Richard replied smoothly. Margaret has been documenting concerning behavior patterns for months. Daniel turned to Margaret, betrayal cutting deeper than any business loss. 8 years, Margaret. 8 years. Daniel, please understand. After Mrs. Catherine died, you changed. You became obsessed with impossible cures, throwing money at problems that couldn't be solved. And then with the maid, the way you've been looking at her, talking about her. Margaret's voice broke. I was worried about you. When Mr. Hensley said he could help get the children proper care while protecting your business interests. You've been spying on me, reporting to him. I've been watching someone I care about spiral into delusion, Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. The Rosa situation, Daniel, she's manipulating you. A grief-stricken billionaire, a vulnerable immigrant woman who needs money and status. Stop. Daniel's voice carried a warning that made everyone in the room take notice. Don't you dare reduce what Rosa has done for my children to some kind of gold-digging scheme. Dr. Chen consulted her notes. Mr. Blackwood, can you tell me about your relationship with Ms. Santos? She's my children's caregiver. Is that all? Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Richard pounced on the silence. Margaret documented several instances of inappropriate intimacy. Extended private conversations, physical contact, exclusion of medical professionals in favor of the domestic workers' opinions. There's nothing inappropriate about. Daniel, Dr. Martinez interrupted. We need to discuss what we found upstairs. A new chill ran down Daniel's spine. Upstairs? I told you to leave. We had a court order, Janet Morrison said, producing legal documents. Patricia escorted Dr. Martinez for a final medical evaluation before the children are transferred to appropriate care. Transferred. Daniel was on his feet, every instinct screaming danger. No one is transferring my children anywhere. Mr. Blackwood, Dr. Martinez said carefully, we discovered some very troubling evidence in the children's room. What evidence? Medication irregularities. Doses of muscle relaxants and pain medications that don't match prescribed schedules. It appears someone has been experimenting with the children's pharmaceutical care. The room spun around Daniel. That's impossible. Rosa doesn't have access to their medications. Only the nursing staff. He stopped, his eyes finding Patricia, whose expression was carefully neutral. Too neutral. Patricia, he said slowly, you've been documenting Rosa's interactions with the children for months. You had access to their medications. You could have altered dosages to make Rosa's therapy look. Mr. Blackwood, Patricia interrupted coldly, are you accusing a licensed medical professional of endangering children to frame a domestic worker? I'm asking why you've been so determined to discredit Rosa from the beginning. Richard stepped forward again. Daniel, listen to yourself. You're accusing medical professionals of conspiracy rather than accepting that you've been manipulated by someone with questionable motives. Questionable motives? Rosa has been with my children every day, pouring her heart into their care, while you vultures circled my business. Has she? Dr. Chen asked quietly. Mr. Blackwood, what do you actually know about Rosa Santos's background? Something cold slithered through Daniel's chest. I know she's a trained pediatric physical therapist. I know she lost her daughter in an earthquake. I know she's been the only person who believed my children could recover. Dr. Chen exchanged glances with Janet Morrison. Mr. Blackwood, there are some discrepancies in Ms. Santos's personal history that we need to discuss. What discrepancies? There's no record of a daughter named Sofia Santos dying in any earthquake in El Salvador in the time frame Ms. Santos provided. In fact, there's no record of Sofia Santos existing at all. The words hit Daniel like physical blows. That's impossible. Furthermore, Dr. Chen continued relentlessly, Ms. Santos's medical credentials, while real, were suspended in El Salvador following an incident involving unauthorized treatment of a patient. What incident? A child died under her care. A child whose parents had specifically requested she not be involved in treatment. Ms. Santos ignored those instructions and administered therapy that led to complications. Daniel's vision blurred. You're lying. The records are all here, Mr. Blackwood. Ms. Santos came to America not as a grieving mother seeking a new start, but as a medical professional fleeing the consequences of professional misconduct. No. The word came out as barely a whisper. Rosa wouldn't, she couldn't. But even as he denied it, pieces of a different puzzle began forming in his mind. Rosa's reluctance to discuss her credentials, her knowledge of exactly what therapy to provide, her intense, almost desperate attachment to Emma and Jake, her tears when she talked about being unable to save Sofia. Not because Sofia was her daughter, but because Sofia was her patient. The patient who died because Rosa couldn't let go, couldn't accept medical authority, couldn't stop believing in impossible recoveries. Where is she? Daniel demanded, his voice hollow. Where's Rosa? Janet Morrison consulted her clipboard. Ms. Santos was taken into custody 20 minutes ago on charges of practicing medicine without a license and child endangerment. She's being held pending immigration review. The room tilted around Daniel. Rosa, the woman he'd been falling in love with, was gone. Arrested. And everything she'd told him about herself was a lie. Daniel, Richard said with false sympathy, I know this is devastating, but you can see why we were concerned. A woman with a history of medical misconduct, targeting a vulnerable widower with disabled children. Stop talking. Daniel's voice was barely human. Everyone stopped talking. He thought about Rosa's tears when she spoke of Sofia. The raw, genuine grief in her voice. The way she'd looked at Emma and Jake like they were her own children. The gentle strength in her hands as she moved their legs, sang to them, believed in them when everyone else had given up. Either Rosa Santos was the most talented manipulator he'd ever encountered, or the people in this room were destroying an innocent woman to get what they wanted. But which was it? His phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Asterisk, Mr. Blackwood, this is Rosa. They're taking me away. Please don't believe what they tell you about Sofia. She was real. She was mine. I can prove it. Trust what you saw with your own eyes. Your children need you to fight. R asterisk. Daniel stared at the message, his heart hammering. Rosa had managed to get word to him, even from custody. She was still fighting, still thinking about Emma and Jake even as her world collapsed. Mr. Blackwood, Dr. Chen said gently, I can see this is overwhelming. That's exactly why we need to discuss temporary guardianship arrangements while you process this information and receive appropriate counseling. Temporary guardianship? The children need immediate medical supervision in a controlled environment. And you need time to recover from what's clearly been a very manipulative situation. Daniel looked around the room at the faces staring at him with various combinations of pity, concern, and calculation. Margaret, whose betrayal had made this intervention possible. Richard, whose greed had orchestrated it. Dr. Martinez, whose medical arrogance had dismissed his children's progress. Patricia, whose hostility toward Rosa had poisoned every interaction. And absent from the room was the one person who'd never given up on Emma and Jake. The woman who was either his family's salvation or their destroyer, now sitting in a cell while his children lay upstairs, possibly losing the only hope they'd ever known. I need to see my children, Daniel said quietly. Of course, Janet Morrison replied. To say goodbye before the transfer. Transfer to where? Sunshine Valley Extended Care. It's a specialized facility for children with severe neurological impairments. They'll receive round-the-clock medical supervision. Sunshine Valley. Daniel knew the name. It was where children went to die slowly, surrounded by machines instead of love. Everything he'd fought for, everything Rosa had built with the children, was about to be erased. His business empire was being stolen through legal manipulation. The woman he was falling in love with was being destroyed by lies, or had been lying to him all along. And upstairs, Emma and Jake lay waiting for someone to continue believing in the impossible. The devastation was complete. Daniel Blackwood, who'd never lost a major battle in his life, was being systematically stripped of everything that mattered. The only question now was whether he had any fight left in him, or whether Rosa Santos had been worth fighting for it all. Daniel climbed the stairs to his children's room like a man walking to his own execution. Each step felt weighted with the gravity of everything he was about to lose. Emma and Jake, Rosa, his faith in his own judgment, perhaps even his sanity. The hallway that had once echoed with his children's laughter now felt like a tomb. He paused outside their door, hearing the low murmur of medical professionals inside preparing for the transfer. In less than an hour, Emma and Jake would be gone, reduced to case numbers in a sterile facility where no one would sing Spanish lullabies or believe in impossible recoveries. He pushed open the door to find Dr. Martinez and 2 paramedics preparing portable ventilation equipment. The children lay motionless in their beds, already looking smaller somehow, as if they sensed the approaching separation. "Where's their personal belongings?" Daniel asked. "The facility will provide everything they need," Dr. Martinez replied without looking up. "Personal items can be problematic in institutional settings." Problematic. Emotional attachments that interfere with medical care. Daniel wanted to scream that emotional attachments were the only thing that had helped his children, but the words died in his throat. Everyone in this room believed Rosa had manipulated him. Everyone believed the progress he'd witnessed was delusion or lies. Maybe they were right. He moved to Emma's bedside, taking her small hand in his. Her skin felt cold, lifeless. No response to his touch, no recognition in her eyes. Had the spark he'd seen yesterday been real, or had Rosa's conviction been so powerful that it had infected his perception? "Emma, sweetheart," he whispered. "Daddy's here." Nothing. Not even the flutter of an eyelid. Dr. Martinez watched with what might have been sympathy. "Daniel, I know this is difficult. But you'll see, in a proper medical environment, without outside interference, you'll be able to process their condition more clearly." "Process their condition," Daniel repeated bitterly. "You mean accept that they're gone? Accept that they need professional care you can't provide at home?" Daniel looked around the room that Rosa had transformed into a sanctuary of hope. The small CD player where she'd played Chopin for Jake. The collection of children's books in Spanish and English that she'd read aloud every day. The hand-drawn pictures taped to the walls. Stick figure drawings Emma had made before the accident, which Rosa had hung at child eye level, so they'd be the first thing the children saw if they opened their eyes. All of it would be discarded as medically irrelevant. "I want a few minutes alone with them," Daniel said. Dr. Martinez hesitated. "The transfer team is on a tight schedule." 5 minutes. After the medical team filed out, Daniel sat on the floor between the beds, exactly where Rosa had spent countless hours. The silence felt deafening without her voice filling the space with songs and stories and stubborn hope. He pulled out his phone and looked at Rosa's text again. Asterisk, trust what you saw with your own eyes. Asterisk. What had he seen with his own eyes? Emma's toe flexing deliberately. Jake's fingers moving in rhythm with music. Their eyes tracking movement, their heart rates responding to Rosa's voice. Or had he seen what a desperate father needed to see? Daniel opened the drawer of Emma's bedside table, looking for anything that might provide clarity. Inside, he found Rosa's notebook, the journal she'd shown him yesterday. The medical team must have missed it in their hurry to gather evidence. He opened it carefully, running his finger over the Spanish text he couldn't read. But halfway through the notebook, he found something that made his breath catch. Photographs. Not of Emma and Jake, but of a little girl with Rosa's eyes and smile. A little girl playing in a garden, blowing bubbles, sitting at a tiny piano. Written on the back in Rosa's careful handwriting. Sofia Elena Santos, Mi Pequeña Estrella, 2018 to 2022. Daniel's hands trembled as he turned the photo over. 2018 to 2022. The dates were right. And there, in the corner of the photo, was a newspaper visible on a table with a date that matched Rosa's timeline exactly. Sofia had been real. Rosa's daughter had existed. But if Sofia was real, why had the investigators found no record of her death? Why were there discrepancies in Rosa's story? Daniel flipped through more pages, finding more photos, more evidence of a life lived and lost. Then, near the back of the journal, he found something that made his blood run cold. A death certificate. Not for Sofia Santos, but for Sofia Elena Morales. Rosa's married name had been Morales, not Santos. She'd changed her name after her daughter's death, possibly to escape the grief, possibly to start over. The investigators had been looking for the wrong name, the wrong family. Rosa hadn't lied about losing her daughter. She'd simply become someone else after the loss, a common response to overwhelming trauma. But what about the medical misconduct? The suspended license? Daniel found the answer 3 pages later, in a letter written in Spanish with an official government seal. He couldn't read the words, but he recognized legal formatting. This wasn't a suspension notice, it was a commendation. Rosa Elena Morales, pediatric physical therapist, honored for exceptional service to children with traumatic injuries. The investigators hadn't just gotten the name wrong. They'd gotten everything wrong. Or they'd lied deliberately. Daniel's phone rang, startling him from his discovery. Margaret's name on the screen. Daniel, where are you? The transfer team is ready. Margaret, I found something. Evidence that Rosa's story is true. The investigators. Daniel, please don't do this to yourself. I know you want to believe in her, but... The death certificate, Margaret. Sophia was real. Rosa lost her daughter exactly like she said. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, Daniel, even if that's true, it doesn't change the medical misconduct findings. What if those are lies too? What if this whole thing is about forcing the merger through, and Rosa is just collateral damage? Daniel, Margaret's voice cracked. I need to tell you something. Something I should have said earlier. What? Richard didn't just approach me about your business decisions. He approached me 6 months ago, right after the accident. He said that if anything happened to your judgment, if you became unable to run the company effectively, he had contingency plans. Daniel's vision darkened. Contingency plans? The merger wasn't his idea, Daniel. It was mine. Richard convinced me that you were spiraling, that the children's condition was destroying you, and that the only way to protect everything you'd built was to ensure stable leadership. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Richard or the medical team had done. Margaret hadn't just been reporting his behavior. She'd been actively working to undermine his authority for months. You set this up, Daniel said, his voice barely human. All of it. The medical pressure, the CPS investigation, discrediting Rosa. You orchestrated my destruction. I was trying to save you. From yourself, from her manipulation, from... Daniel hung up and immediately called his head of security. Marcus, I need you to investigate the background check on Rosa Santos. Specifically, who provided the information about medical misconduct and the daughter's death. Mr. Blackwood, I can tell you that right now. The information came from your assistant, Margaret Chin. She said you'd requested an updated security screening. Margaret had provided the false information that led to Rosa's arrest. Margaret, who'd had access to his security systems, his legal team, his entire life. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. His most trusted employee had been systematically destroying his family for months, using his own resources against him. And Rosa, innocent, grieving, genuinely loving Rosa, was sitting in a detention cell because of lies Margaret had fed to investigators. Daniel heard voices in the hallway. The transfer team was coming back. In minutes, his children would be loaded into ambulances and taken away, possibly forever. He looked down at Emma and Jake, so still, so silent. Even if Rosa was innocent, even if he could prove Margaret's deception, would it matter? The children showed no response now. Maybe the medical establishment was right. Maybe hope was just another word for delusion. Mr. Blackwood? Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway. We need to begin the transfer process. Daniel stood slowly, Rosa's journal clutched in his hands. I want to say goodbye. Of course. As the medical team began preparing the children for transport, Daniel leaned over Emma's bed. Sweetheart, I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this. I'm sorry I let them take Rosa away. I'm sorry I failed you. Emma's eyes remained fixed on the ceiling, showing no sign that she'd heard him. Daniel moved to Jake's bed, his heart breaking with every word. I love you, son. I'll keep fighting for you, I promise. I'll find a way to bring you both home. Jake's expression didn't change. The paramedics began moving Emma onto a transport gurney. As they lifted her small body, one of her arms fell to the side, hanging limp and lifeless. Daniel felt something die inside him. These weren't his children anymore. They were medical cases, problems to be managed, bodies without souls. Rosa had been wrong. The doctors had been right all along. And he'd destroyed his last chance to be with Emma and Jake by believing in an impossible dream. Mr. Blackwood, Dr. Martinez said gently. You can visit them at the facility. Tomorrow, after they're settled. Daniel nodded numbly, not trusting his voice. He watched them while Emma out of the room that had been filled with music and stories and laughter. Jake followed minutes later, connected to machines that breathed for him, monitored his heart, kept his body functioning while his spirit drifted somewhere unreachable. The house fell silent. 30,000 square feet of emptiness, every room echoing with memories of the family that had once lived here. Daniel found himself standing in the doorway of what used to be the playroom, staring at the indentations in the carpet where the hospital beds had been. Rosa's CD player sat forgotten on a shelf, along with the children's books she'd read every day. He picked up one of the books, *Goodnight Moon* in Spanish. As he opened it, a piece of paper fell out. A child's drawing, crayon on construction paper. 2 stick figures holding hands with a larger figure between them, all standing under a yellow sun. At the bottom, in Emma's careful 8-year-old handwriting, me and Jake and Rosa. Emma had drawn this picture. Emma, who supposedly couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't respond to the world around her, had somehow created this drawing of the 3 of them together. Which meant either Emma had drawn it before the accident, unlikely, since Rosa hadn't been part of their daily lives then, or she'd drawn it after. When the doctor said she was incapable of voluntary movement, Daniel stared at the drawing, his hands shaking. This wasn't wishful thinking or manipulation. This was proof that his children were aware, were responding, were fighting their way back to consciousness. And he'd let them be taken away just when they needed him most. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Blackwood, this is Dr. Maria Santos, Rosa's sister. I'm an immigration lawyer in Los Angeles. Rosa asked me to contact you. We need to meet. Tonight. There are things about my sister's situation you don't understand. And things about your children that she discovered but couldn't tell you. M. Santos *. Daniel stared at the message, hope and desperation warring in his chest. Rosa had a sister. A lawyer who could maybe, possibly, help unravel the web of lies that had destroyed his family. But even if he could prove Rosa's innocence, even if he could expose Margaret's betrayal, the children were gone. Locked away in a facility where no one would sing to them, move their legs, believe in their potential for recovery. He'd lost everything that mattered. His children, the woman he'd fallen in love with, his faith in his own judgment. All he had left was Emma's drawing of a family that existed for maybe 6 weeks before the system tore it apart. But as Daniel sat alone in the empty house, holding his daughter's artwork, he realized something important. Emma had drawn Rosa as part of their family. Not as an employee, not as hired help, but as someone who belonged with them. His 8-year-old daughter, trapped in an unresponsive body, had somehow found a way to communicate the most important truth of all. Rosa wasn't just their caregiver. She was their chosen family. And family was worth fighting for, no matter how impossible the odds. Daniel picked up his phone and typed back to Dr. Maria Santos. Where do you want to meet? The coffee shop in downtown LA felt like neutral territory. Far from the Malibu mansion where Daniel's world had imploded, anonymous enough that corporate spies and CPS investigators couldn't easily track him. At 11 p.m., the place was nearly empty except for late-night students and insomniacs seeking caffeine salvation. Dr. Maria Santos looked nothing like Rosa. Where Rosa was soft and maternal, Maria was sharp-edged and fierce, her designer suit and confident posture screaming successful attorney. But her eyes, Rosa's eyes, carried the same depth of pain and determination. Mr. Blackwood, she said, standing as he approached her corner table. Thank you for coming. Daniel slumped into the chair across from her, feeling every one of his 42 years. Your sister is in federal detention because of lies my assistant fed to investigators. My children are in a facility where they'll never recover. I'm about to lose my company to a hostile takeover disguised as an intervention. What exactly can you tell me that will make any of this better? Maria opened a leather portfolio and slid a stack of documents across the table. The truth about who my sister really is. And what she discovered about your children that she was afraid to tell you. Daniel picked up the first document. A medical degree from Universidad de El Salvador, summa cum laude. Rosa Elena Morales, Doctor of Physical Therapy, specializing in pediatric neurological rehabilitation. Doctor? Daniel's voice cracked. Rosa has a doctorate? She was the youngest person ever to receive advanced certification in pediatric neurological rehabilitation in Central America. She pioneered techniques for working with children who'd suffered traumatic brain injuries during the civil conflicts. Her methods had an 80% success rate for children other doctors had written off as hopeless. Daniel flipped through more documents, research papers, commendations, before and after photos of children who'd learned to walk again under Rosa's care. Why didn't she tell me? Because in America, her credentials meant nothing without expensive recertification programs she couldn't afford. And because after Sophia died, she blamed herself for not being able to save her own daughter despite being able to save so many others. The earthquake. Maria's expression darkened. There was no earthquake, Mr. Blackwood. Sophia died of complications from leukemia. Rosa spent every penny she had, called in every favor, used every technique she'd ever learned. But sometimes medicine isn't enough. Daniel felt the pieces reshuffling in his mind. So she came here and took domestic work because she couldn't bear to practice medicine again. Until she met Emma and Jake. Children with the same kind of traumatic brain injuries she'd spent her career treating. She saw what your doctors missed, subtle signs of consciousness that only someone with her specialized training would recognize. But the misconduct allegations were fabricated by someone with access to official documentation and the ability to create convincing forgeries. Maria leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Mr. Blackwood, my sister didn't just stumble into your family's employment. She was placed there. Daniel's blood chilled. Placed there? By whom? Someone who knew about her background, her capabilities, and her vulnerability. Someone who wanted a credentialed medical professional caring for your children without the legal complications of official treatment. That's impossible. Catherine hired Rosa through. Daniel stopped, memory flooding back. Through Margaret. Margaret recommended Rosa. Maria nodded grimly. Your assistant researched my sister extensively before arranging her employment. She knew exactly who Rosa was, and exactly how to use her. The coffee shop seemed to tilt around Daniel. Margaret planned this from the beginning, even before the accident. After your wife's cancer diagnosis, Margaret began contingency planning for your children's care. She identified Rosa as someone with the skills to handle medical crises, but without the legal standing to challenge decisions. But why place Rosa with us if Margaret was planning to destroy her later? Because Margaret needed someone competent enough to keep your children alive through whatever was coming, but disposable enough to eliminate when the time came. Rosa was perfect, skilled, vulnerable, with a background that could be weaponized against her. Daniel stared at the documents, his mind reeling. Whatever was coming, Margaret knew the accident was going to happen. Maria's silence was more terrifying than any answer. The accident wasn't an accident, Daniel whispered. I don't have proof, but the timing was remarkably convenient for certain business interests. Your company's stock price, the merger negotiations, the insurance policies that paid out in the event of family catastrophe. Daniel's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Margaret's name on the screen. He showed it to Maria, who nodded grimly. Answer it, she said. But put it on speaker. Daniel, thank God. I've been calling for hours. Where are you? Processing the fact that you've been lying to me for years. A pause. Daniel, I don't know what Rosa's people have told you, but you can't trust. I know about Rosa's doctorate, Margaret. I know about her real credentials. I know you placed her with our family deliberately. Another pause, longer this time. When Margaret spoke again, her voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. Daniel, you're having a breakdown. The stress of losing the children, the isolation, Rosa's manipulation. You're not thinking clearly. Come home. Let me help you. Help me like you helped orchestrate the CPS investigation. Like you helped fabricate Rosa's misconduct record. I protected you from making catastrophic decisions. Rosa was dangerous, Daniel. Her obsession with your children, her delusions about their recovery potential. She was using them to manipulate you into an inappropriate relationship. Daniel looked at Maria, who was recording the conversation on her phone. Inappropriate relationship? You were falling in love with her, Daniel. A grieving billionaire and a vulnerable immigrant with questionable motives. The optics alone could have destroyed your reputation. So you destroyed her instead. I saved you from destroying yourself. Daniel felt something fundamental shift inside him. For years, he'd trusted Margaret's judgment over his own instincts. He'd let her manage his life, his business, his relationships. He'd been so afraid of making mistakes that he'd handed control to someone else. But not anymore. Margaret, I want you to listen very carefully. I'm going to expose every lie you've told, every document you've forged, every law you've broken. I'm going to bring Rosa home and get my children the care they actually need. And when I'm done, you're going to prison." Margaret's laugh was bitter. "Daniel, you have no power anymore. The company is under investigation for your erratic behavior. The children are in state custody. Rosa is facing deportation charges. You have nothing left to fight with." "I have the truth." "The truth?" Margaret's voice turned vicious. "The truth is that your children are vegetables, Daniel. Brain-dead vegetables who will never recover, never speak, never walk again. Rosa filled your head with fairy tales because she wanted your money and your status. And you were so desperate to believe in miracles that you let her manipulate you into destroying everything Catherine built. The words were designed to break him, to make him doubt everything he'd witnessed, everything he'd felt. A month ago, they might have worked. But Daniel had seen Emma's drawing. He'd felt Jake's fingers move in rhythm with music. He'd watched Rosa pour genuine love into his children's care, asking for nothing in return except the chance to believe in their recovery. "You're wrong, Margaret. About Rosa, about the children, about everything that matters. Daniel, and here's what's going to happen next. I'm going to choose love over fear, hope over despair, and faith over evidence. I'm going to fight for my family with everything I have left. And Margaret, if you've done anything to hurt Emma and Jake in that facility, if you've caused them one moment of additional suffering, I will destroy you so completely that you'll wish you'd never been born." Daniel hung up and looked at Maria, who was staring at him with something like admiration. "That was either very brave or very stupid," she said. "Probably both. But I'm done letting other people make decisions about my family." Daniel leaned forward, his voice intense. "What do we need to do to get Rosa out of detention and my children out of that facility? It won't be easy. The charges against Rosa are federal. The custody order for your children has CPS backing. We're fighting the system with limited resources and almost no time. What if resources weren't limited?" Maria smiled for the first time since they'd met. "Mr. Blackwood, are you asking if money can buy justice? I'm asking if love can. In my experience," Maria said, gathering the documents, "love backed by $12 billion tends to be very persuasive." Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in months: genuine hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope of a man afraid to face reality, but the fierce, determined hope of someone who'd finally found something worth fighting for. "Then let's go save my family." The federal detention center looked like a fortress designed to crush hope. At 3 a.m., its fluorescent-lit corridors echoed with the sound of Daniel's expensive shoes and Maria's determined stride as they followed the night supervisor toward the holding cells. "This is highly irregular," the supervisor muttered, clutching the emergency release paperwork Maria had somehow produced in the 2 hours since their coffee shop meeting. "Federal immigration detainees aren't usually released on habeas corpus writs at 3 in the morning." "My client's detention was based on falsified evidence," Maria replied crisply. "The longer she's held illegally, the larger the federal lawsuit becomes." Daniel said nothing, his mind focused entirely on what lay ahead. Getting Rosa released was only the first step. They still had to reach Emma and Jake before Margaret's influence did something irreversible. The supervisor stopped at a reinforced door marked, "Holding Cell 7. Through the small window, Daniel could see Rosa sitting on a narrow cot, her back straight despite everything that had happened. Even in an orange detention jumpsuit, she carried herself with quiet dignity. The door opened with an electronic buzz. Rosa looked up, and when she saw Daniel, her composure finally cracked. "Daniel?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "How did you?" "Your sister." Daniel stepped into the cell, wanting nothing more than to pull Rosa into his arms, but acutely aware of the guards watching. "Rosa, I know about Sophia. I know about your real credentials. I know Margaret orchestrated everything." Tears spilled down Rosa's cheeks. "The children. Where are Emma and Jake?" "Sunshine Valley Extended Care. But we're going to get them." Rosa stood slowly, her legs unsteady after hours of confinement. "Daniel, there's something I need to tell you. Something I discovered the night before they arrested me." "What?" Emma spoke. The words hit Daniel like lightning. She spoke. One word. Just one word, but clear and intentional. She said Rosa when I was singing to her. "And Jake." Jake hummed an entire melody. The Chopin piece, perfectly pitched. Daniel's knees nearly gave out. His children weren't just conscious, they were actively trying to communicate. "Why didn't you tell me immediately?" Rosa's expression crumbled. "Because I was terrified. If I reported it and the doctors couldn't replicate it, they'd use it as proof that I was delusional. I wanted to wait until they could do it consistently, until there was no doubt. But now they're gone. Now they're in a place where no one will listen for whispered words or soft humming, where any attempt to communicate will be dismissed as involuntary response. Maria appeared in the doorway. We need to move. Now. I just got word that Margaret is at the facility with court orders to authorize experimental sedation protocols. Sedation protocols? Heavy psychoactive drugs to reduce agitation in the children. Once they're medicated, any cognitive response becomes chemically impossible. Daniel felt ice flood his veins. Margaret wasn't just trying to control his business empire. She was actively ensuring that Emma and Jake would never recover consciousness. The cruelty was staggering. 20 minutes later, they were racing through the pre-dawn darkness toward Sunshine Valley in Daniel's Tesla. Rosa in the passenger seat still wearing the detention center jumpsuit. Maria in the back coordinating legal strategy on 3 different phones. The facility administrator is Dr. Rebecca Walsh, Maria was saying. She's got a history of aggressive pharmaceutical intervention and has been censured twice for over-medicating pediatric patients. Let me guess, Daniel said grimly. Margaret chose the facility specifically. Margaret chose everything specifically. The timing, the location, the personnel. This isn't just business manipulation, Daniel. This is systematic child abuse. Rosa gripped the dashboard as Daniel took a turn too fast. How long do we have before they start the sedation? Maria checked her phone. The court order was signed at 2 a.m. Standard protocol requires a 12-hour observation period before beginning pharmaceutical intervention. That gives us until 2 p.m., Daniel calculated. 8 hours. Less, Maria corrected. Margaret petitioned for emergency authorization based on immediate behavioral concerns. If she can document any agitation or distress in the children, she can start the drugs immediately. Daniel's phone rang. Margaret again. This time, he answered without hesitation. Whatever you're planning, Margaret, it's over. Daniel, where are you? Security says you left the house with Rosa's sister. Please tell me you're not doing something catastrophically stupid. I'm doing something you can't understand. I'm fighting for my children. Your children are vegetables. Margaret's voice cracked with frustration. They're never going to recover, never going to be the kids you remember. The kindest thing you can do is let them go peacefully. Peacefully? You're planning to drug them into chemical comas. I'm planning to end their suffering. And yours. Rosa grabbed the phone from Daniel's hand. Margaret, this is Rosa Santos. I want you to listen very carefully. You shouldn't even be in this country, you manipulative. Emma said my name 2 nights ago. Jake hummed Chopin's Minute Waltz in perfect pitch. Your vegetables are fighting their way back to consciousness, and you're trying to chemically lobotomize them to cover up your crimes. Silence on the other end of the line. That's impossible, Margaret finally whispered. It's documented, Rosa lied smoothly. Video recordings, audio analysis, neurological monitoring data. Everything you tried to suppress is recorded and being reviewed by independent medical experts right now. You're lying. Am I? Daniel, do you want to tell Margaret about Emma's drawing? Daniel caught on immediately. The picture Emma drew of the 3 of us together, Margaret. Your vegetative patient managed to create artwork depicting her chosen family. More silence. Then Margaret's voice, smaller now, frightened. Even if that's true, it doesn't change anything. The merger needs to happen. Richard has contracts, investors, regulatory approval. The merger was never about business, Daniel said. It was about control. You've been systematically destroying my family to steal my company. I've been protecting your company from your emotional instability. Then why forge evidence against Rosa? Why lie about her credentials? Why fabricate misconduct charges? Because she was going to ruin everything. You were falling in love with her, making decisions based on fantasy instead of reality. The merger couldn't happen if you were emotionally compromised. Margaret stopped abruptly, realizing she'd just confessed to orchestrating Rosa's destruction for business purposes. And there it is, Maria said quietly from the back seat. Recorded confession of conspiracy, fraud, and child endangerment. Margaret, Daniel said, his voice deadly calm. I want you to listen very carefully. You have exactly 1 hour to withdraw all court orders, release my children from that facility, and disappear from our lives forever. If you don't, I will use every resource I have to destroy you so completely that you'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison. Daniel, you can't. 1 hour, Margaret. Daniel hung up and turned to Rosa. Do you really think Emma and Jake can demonstrate consciousness on command? If we can get them away from the medical equipment and back into an environment where they feel safe, where they hear familiar voices and music. Rosa's eyes blazed with fierce determination. Yes, but Daniel, we need to understand something. Their recovery isn't going to look like medical miracles. It's going to look like children slowly, painfully fighting their way back to themselves. It might take months, years. I don't care if it takes forever, Daniel said. They're my children. They're our children. And they're coming home. The GPS announced their arrival at Sunshine Valley Extended Care. The facility looked exactly like what it was, a warehouse for the hopeless, all concrete and efficiency with no room for love or dreams. Security cameras, Maria noted. And guards. Margaret's not taking any chances. Daniel parked in the visitor lot and turned to face Rosa. Are you ready for this? She reached over and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. I've been ready since the day I met Emma and Jake. Rosa, I need you to know something. Whatever happens in there, whatever we find, I know, she said softly, squeezing his hand. I know, Daniel. I feel it too. The moment hung between them, electric with possibility and terror. Two people who'd found love in the darkest circumstances, about to fight for the family they'd chosen to create. They walked into Sunshine Valley together, prepared for the battle of their lives. The lobby was sterile and unwelcoming, dominated by a security desk where a guard looked up with obvious suspicion. Behind him, Dr. Rebecca Walsh emerged from an office, her expression immediately hostile. Mr. Blackwood, you're not authorized to be here. And this woman, she pointed at Rosa, is absolutely forbidden from having contact with the patients. My children, Daniel corrected. And Dr. Santos is their treating physician. Dr. Santos? Walsh's eyebrows shot up. This woman is a domestic worker facing federal charges. Maria stepped forward, producing a thick folder of documents. Dr. Rosa Elena Santos, board-certified pediatric neurological rehabilitation specialist, with emergency practice privileges granted by the State Medical Board pending credential review. Walsh grabbed the documents, scanning them with growing alarm. This is impossible. These credentials would take weeks to verify. Money opens doors very quickly when children's lives are at stake, Maria said calmly. Now, Dr. Santos requires immediate access to her patients for emergency neurological assessment. The children are scheduled for sedation protocols in 30 minutes, Walsh protested. Dr. Martinez's orders specifically. Dr. Martinez's orders have been superseded, Daniel interrupted. By court order, federal medical review, and parental authority. Walsh looked frantically between the documents and the three people facing her. I need to verify this with my legal department. You need to take us to my children. Now, the authority in Daniel's voice, backed by legal documentation and obvious wealth, cracked Walsh's resistance. Room 247, she said reluctantly. But any disruption of medical protocols will be your responsibility if you delay this emergency assessment, Maria finished smoothly. They followed Walsh down corridors that smelled of disinfectant and despair, past rooms where other children lay connected to machines, their families long since gone. Daniel's heart broke for every one of them, but his focus remained laser-sharp on Emma and Jake. Room 247 was at the end of the hall. Through the window, Daniel could see his children lying in identical hospital beds, surrounded by monitoring equipment, utterly still. Walsh opened the door, and Daniel's worst fears were confirmed. Emma and Jake looked smaller, more fragile than they had at home. The aggressive medical environment had stripped away every trace of the progress Rosa had made with them. They've been unresponsive since arrival, Walsh reported clinically. No eye movement, no voluntary muscle activity, no reaction to stimuli. Standard vegetative presentation. Rosa moved immediately to Emma's bedside, ignoring the medical equipment to focus on her patient. Emma, mi amor, it's Rosa. I'm here. Daddy's here. We came to take you home. Nothing. Emma's eyes stared at the ceiling, her body motionless. Daniel felt his hope cracking. Maybe the medical establishment was right. Maybe Rosa's therapy had been wishful thinking. Maybe his children really were gone. Jake, Rosa said, moving to his bed. Mi pequeño pianista. Do you remember our music? She began humming Chopin's Minute Waltz, the melody filling the sterile room with warmth and memory. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then Jake's right index finger twitched. Not a random muscle spasm, but a deliberate movement timed perfectly with the melody. Walsh gasped. That's impossible. Rosa continued humming, and Jake's finger continued moving, following the rhythm with precision that defied every medical opinion that had declared him unaware. "Emma," Rosa called softly, never stopping the melody. "Show them, mi vida. Show them you're still here." Emma's eyes shifted. Slowly, deliberately, they moved from the ceiling to Rosa's face. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, hoarse from months of silence, Emma spoke. Rosa came back. The room erupted. Walsh stumbled backward, her clinical composure shattered. Daniel felt tears streaming down his face as he watched his daughter, his supposedly vegetative daughter, track Rosa's movement with perfect awareness. "This is impossible," Walsh kept repeating. "The brain scans, the motor responses, it's medically impossible." "It's love," Rosa said simply, taking Emma's hand. "Something your machines can't measure." Jake's humming grew stronger, more confident, the melody flowing from his lips in perfect pitch. His fingers moved against the blanket as if playing an invisible piano, muscle memory and consciousness working together to create music from silence. That's when the door burst open and Margaret strode in, flanked by Dr. Martinez and 2 security guards. "Enough!" Margaret's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "This is fraud, manipulation, and child endangerment." "This is recovery," Daniel said, moving protectively in front of Rosa and the children. "This is delusional theater." Margaret turned to Dr. Martinez. "Doctor, please explain to Mr. Blackwood why these responses are medically meaningless." Dr. Martinez approached Jake's bed, staring at the boy's moving fingers with professional confusion. "I don't understand. The neurological assessments clearly indicated." "The assessments were wrong," Rosa interrupted. "Or the assessments measured the wrong things. You looked for gross motor function and verbal response. I looked for micro-expressions, breathing patterns, muscle tension, eye tracking. Your tests required them to perform like healthy children. My therapy met them where they were." Margaret stepped forward with barely controlled fury. "Even if this is real, which I doubt, it doesn't change the legal situation. The children require institutional care. The business requires stable leadership. And you," she pointed at Rosa, "are still facing federal charges." "Actually," Maria said, entering the room with a phone in her hand, "those charges have been dropped. Seems the evidence was fabricated by someone with access to official documentation systems. Someone is about to face federal charges themselves." Margaret's face went white. "That's impossible. FBI Cyber Crimes Division works very efficiently when motivated by a $12 billion victim of corporate espionage," Maria continued. "They trace the falsified documents to your personal computer, Margaret, along with evidence of insider trading, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have no proof. We have your recorded confession from the phone call. We have the falsified documents with digital fingerprints. We have testimony from Rosa's colleagues in El Salvador about her real credentials. And most importantly, we have 2 children who are living proof that your medical assessments were wrong." Margaret looked around the room desperately, her carefully constructed conspiracy crumbling. "Richard will never let this stand. The merger contracts. Richard Hensley was arrested 20 minutes ago on federal racketeering charges," Maria said. "Turns out his company has been systematically targeting vulnerable tech executives for hostile takeovers. You weren't his first accomplice, Margaret. Just his most recent." The security guard stepped forward, moving toward Margaret instead of Daniel. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." "No." Margaret's composure finally shattered completely. "Daniel, you don't understand. The children will never be normal. Rosa is filling your head with false hope. You're destroying everything Catherine built for fantasy." "I'm choosing love over fear," Daniel said quietly. "Something you never understood." As the guards escorted Margaret from the room, her voice echoed down the hallway. "You'll regret this. When the fairy tale ends, when reality sets in, you'll remember that I tried to save you." The door closed, leaving an almost supernatural silence. Emma's voice broke the quiet. "Daddy, is the mean lady gone?" Daniel nearly collapsed with relief and joy. His daughter wasn't just conscious, she was aware, protective, present. "Yes, sweetheart. The mean lady is gone forever." Jake turned his head slowly toward his father's voice. "Dad, do I?" The word came out slurred but unmistakable. "I'm here, son. I'm here." Dr. Walsh stared at the children in professional shock. This level of cognitive function, the speaking, the awareness, it should be impossible with their brain injuries. "Maybe," Rosa said, helping Emma sit up slowly. "The injuries weren't as severe as everyone assumed. Maybe love really is the best medicine." Daniel moved to Rosa's side, watching his children. Their children, slowly, painstakingly demonstrate that miracles weren't about instant healing. They were about refusing to give up hope, even when hope seemed impossible. "Rosa," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "I love you." She turned to him, her eyes bright with tears and joy. "I love you too, Daniel. I love all of you." Emma's small voice interrupted them. "Rosa stays with us now?" Rosa looked at Daniel, the question hanging between them. After everything they'd been through, after all the lies and manipulation and heartbreak, was it possible that love really could triumph? "Forever," Daniel said, taking Rosa's hand in front of his children, in front of the medical staff, in front of the world. "Rosa stays with us forever." Jake managed a smile, the first smile Daniel had seen from his son in 8 months. Emma squeezed Rosa's hand with strength that shouldn't have been possible. And in a sterile hospital room that had been designed for endings, a family that had chosen each other began the long, beautiful journey of healing together. 6 months later, Daniel stood in the doorway of what used to be his formal dining room, watching Rosa guide Emma through carefully structured physical therapy exercises. Sunlight streamed through the windows he had enlarged to let in more natural light, and the sound of Jake's piano, halting but determined, drifted from the music room where his new tutor worked with him on rebuilding his motor skills. The house felt completely different now. Gone were the sterile, museum-like spaces Catherine had designed for entertaining business associates. In their place were comfortable, lived-in rooms filled with therapy equipment, children's artwork, and the warm chaos of a family actively healing together. "One more step, Mia Moore," Rosa encouraged Emma, her voice carrying the same patience and love it had that first day Daniel had witnessed their connection. "Remember, your muscles are learning to trust again." Emma's left foot moved forward with concentrated effort, her face scrunched in determination. 6 months ago, doctors had declared her permanently paralyzed. Today, she was walking 20 feet at a time with minimal assistance. "I did it," Emma gasped, reaching the makeshift finish line Rosa had marked with colorful tape. "Rosa, I walked all the way." "You did, sweetheart," Rosa said, catching Emma in a gentle hug. "Your legs remembered exactly what to do." Daniel's throat tightened with emotion as he watched them. Recovery hadn't been the miracle he'd originally hoped for. No dramatic moment when the children suddenly became exactly who they'd been before the accident. Instead, it was this, daily progress measured in single steps, individual words, moments of connection that rebuilt their family one small victory at a time. "Daddy," Emma called, noticing him in the doorway. "Did you see? I walked the whole way." "I saw, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." Daniel entered the room and knelt beside his daughter, marveling at how much stronger she looked. Physical therapy, proper nutrition, and most importantly, the security of being loved unconditionally had transformed both children from fragile patients into determined fighters. "Dr. Santos says next week I might try the stairs," Emma announced with the same enthusiasm she'd once reserved for playground adventures. Dr. Santos. Rosa's credentials had been fully restored 3 months ago, along with retroactive licensing that recognized her advanced training. She now officially served as the children's primary rehabilitation specialist, though Daniel knew her real qualification was something no medical school could teach. "Speaking of Dr. Santos," Daniel said, taking Rosa's hand, "I have some news." Rosa looked up from organizing Emma's therapy equipment, her eyebrows raised in question. "The Pediatric Rehabilitation Wing at Children's Hospital wants to offer you a position as department head. Full medical staff privileges, research funding, and the chance to train other therapists in your techniques." Rosa's eyes widened. "Department head? Daniel, I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of responsibility." "Ready?" Emma interrupted indignantly. "Rosa, you saved me and Jake. Of course you're ready." From the music room came the sound of Jake attempting a simple melody with his left hand while his tutor encouraged him to add his right. The notes were uneven, the timing imperfect, but the determination in each attempt was unmistakable. "Listen to that," Daniel said quietly. 6 months ago, doctors said he'd never have voluntary motor control again. Now he's playing Chopin. "Very slowly," Rosa corrected with a smile. "And with many mistakes. But he's playing, because you never stopped believing he could." Rosa looked between Daniel and Emma, her expression thoughtful. "The position would mean less time here, with you and the children." "It would mean helping other families find the hope we found," Daniel replied. "Other parents who are being told to give up, other children who need someone to see past their injuries to their potential." Like Sophia, Rosa said softly. The mention of her daughter's name no longer brought only pain. Through months of therapy, for herself as well as the children, Rosa had learned to carry Sophia's memory as inspiration rather than burden. Like Sophia, Daniel agreed. Like Emma and Jake. Like all the children who need someone to fight for them. Emma tugged on Rosa's sleeve. You could help other kids walk again? Maybe Mia more. Some of them might learn to walk. Others might learn to speak, or use their hands, or just be more comfortable in their bodies. Then you have to do it, Emma declared with 8-year-old certainty. Because everyone deserves someone who believes in them. Rosa caught Daniel's eye over Emma's head, and he saw the moment she made her decision. The same fierce determination that had driven her to work with his children despite medical skepticism. The same love that had sustained her through false accusations and federal detention. I'll take the position, she said. On one condition. What condition? That we do this as a family. You, me, Emma, Jake. The hospital work, the children's continued recovery, building something that honors what we've learned together. Daniel felt his heart expand with possibilities he'd never imagined. Not just the life they were rebuilding, but the impact they could have on other families facing similar darkness. Dr. and Mr. Blackwood Santos, he said experimentally, has a nice ring to it. Rosa's cheeks flushed. Daniel, are you? I'm asking if you'll marry me, he said simply. Not because we've been through trauma together, not because the children need stability, but because I can't imagine facing any future that doesn't include you. Emma squealed with delight. Rosa's going to be my real mom. I've been your real mom for months, mi vida, Rosa said, tears spilling down her cheeks. Marriage just makes it official. From the music room came the sound of Jake stopping mid-melody. Did someone say marriage? His speech was still slow and deliberate, but perfectly clear. Get in here, son, Daniel called. We're having a family meeting. Jake appeared in the doorway, moving with the careful but determined gait he'd developed over months of physical therapy. His cognitive recovery had been remarkable. Full awareness, perfect memory, gradually improving motor function. The Jake who'd emerged from his silence was somehow both exactly the same and completely transformed by his journey. So, Jake said, settling into his wheelchair for longer conversations, Rosa's going to be our stepmom and work at the hospital helping other kids? If that's okay with you, Rosa said. Jake considered this with the gravity of a child who'd learned too young that life could change in an instant. Will you still sing to us? And move our legs when they get tired? And tell us stories about Sophia. Always, Rosa promised. No matter how busy work gets, you and Emma come first. Forever. Then it's perfect, Jake declared. But can we have a piano at the wedding? I want to play for you and Dad, even if I mess up the notes. Daniel looked around at his family. Not the family he'd planned or expected, but the one they'd chosen to become. Rosa, whose love had saved his children and taught him what real strength looked like. Emma, whose determination to walk again inspired everyone around her. Jake, whose music was slowly returning to fill their house with joy. Margaret had been right about one thing. This wasn't the life he'd had before. The children weren't exactly who they'd been before the accident. Rosa wasn't the unquestioning employee she'd pretended to be. It was better. It was real. It was built on truth instead of control, love instead of fear, hope instead of resignation. There's one more thing, Daniel said, pulling out a legal document he'd been carrying for weeks. I've restructured the company. 50% of Blackwood Technologies is now owned by the Emma and Jake Recovery Foundation, dedicated to funding neurological rehabilitation research and supporting families facing similar challenges. Daniel, Rosa breathed, you can't give away half your company. I'm not giving it away. I'm investing it in what matters most. He looked at his children, then at the woman who'd become their anchor. Money built walls around us, kept us isolated from real connection. Now it's going to tear down walls for other families. Emma clapped her hands with delight. So other kids will have someone like Rosa to help them? Exactly like Rosa, Daniel confirmed. We're going to train therapists in her methods, fund research into consciousness and recovery, and make sure no family has to fight the system alone. Rosa shook her head in amazement. 6 months ago, I was a domestic worker facing deportation. Now I'm going to be department head at Children's Hospital, married to a tech billionaire, and helping establish a foundation. 6 months ago, I was a man who'd given up on his children, Daniel replied. Now I'm someone who knows that love really can move mountains. We've all become different people. Jake struck a chord on his small practice keyboard that Rosa had brought to the dining room. Different but better, he said with a grin. The doorbell rang, interrupting their family moment. Daniel frowned. They weren't expecting anyone, and security hadn't announced a visitor. I'll get it, he said, but Rosa stood with him. We'll get it, she corrected. Together. At the front door stood a woman Daniel didn't recognize, middle-aged, well-dressed, with an expression of nervous hope. Beside her was a girl about Emma's age in a wheelchair, her eyes bright with intelligence despite obvious physical limitations. Mr. Blackwood, the woman said. I'm Sarah Chun, not the psychiatrist, she added quickly, seeing his expression. I'm Sarah Chun, mother of Lily Chun. We heard about your children's recovery, about Dr. Santos's work. We were wondering. Her voice broke slightly. We were wondering if there might be hope for our daughter too. Daniel looked at the little girl in the wheelchair, seeing the same spark in her eyes that he'd learned to recognize in Emma and Jake. Consciousness trapped in an uncooperative body, waiting for someone to believe in the impossible. He felt Rosa squeeze his hand, and knew without words that their real work was just beginning. Please, he said, stepping aside to welcome them in. Come meet our family. We'd love to talk about hope. As Sarah Chun wheeled her daughter into the house where miracles had become daily occurrences, Daniel realized he'd come full circle from that devastating moment in Dr. Martinez's office. Then he'd been a man who heard, nothing more can be done, and accepted defeat. Now he was someone who heard impossible and got to work proving it wrong. The future stretched ahead of them, filled with challenges, setbacks, small victories, and the messy, beautiful reality of a family that had chosen each other through the worst circumstances imaginable. Rosa would revolutionize pediatric rehabilitation while continuing to pour love into Emma and Jake's recovery. The children would grow stronger every day while helping other kids find their own paths to healing. And Daniel would spend the rest of his life ensuring that no parent ever had to hear, "There's nothing more we can do," without someone standing beside them ready to prove that love, patience, and refusal to give up could accomplish what medical science deemed impossible. Some stories end with dramatic rescues or perfect healing. This one ended with something better. A family that had learned to find hope in small victories, strengthen each other, and miracles in the daily choice to keep believing in tomorrow. As Rosa began explaining her techniques to Sarah Chun, while Emma demonstrated her walking progress for Lily, and Jake started playing a simple melody to welcome their new friends, Daniel realized that they weren't just surviving their trauma. They were transforming it into purpose. The house filled with voices, laughter, music, and the sound of children who refused to accept impossible odds. It was the most beautiful sound Daniel had ever heard. And it was just the beginning. What did this story teach you about the power of love to overcome seemingly impossible circumstances? How did it change your perspective on the difference between giving up and letting go, between medical authority and human intuition, between surviving tragedy and transforming it into purpose? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world. Sometimes the greatest miracles aren't about dramatic healing, but about refusing to stop believing in the power of love to create hope where none existed before. In a world that often tells us to be realistic about limitations, maybe the most radical act is choosing to see potential instead of problems, possibilities instead of prognosis, and family in the most unexpected places.